For those that could join today, thank you so much for joining. I'm personally excited about this webinar. This has been Prolific's first webinar, really focused in the RevOps space, which is a group that I've gotten to know during my time at Prolific, and some of the smartest, most innovative people that I've met that are really the secret sauce, in my opinion, to organizations' success. So thank you for joining. For those that could not join today, and feel free to pass it along. We'll be getting a recording out to everyone, and we will be open for questions today. So feel free to post a question in the chat. We'll get to them as soon as we possibly can. If we don't get to them during today's conversation, we'll absolutely get to them at the end. So I'm joined by a couple of great partners of ours, Jeff, Ignacio, and Stephen, who are very strong experts in the RevOps space. And then we're also joined by Jack Gallo, our head of sales, that's also been an incremental part in setting up our revenue operations and leading our sales organization. So I'll turn it over to them for a quick introduction here in a minute. For those of you that have joined that I don't know, my name's Eddie Hansen. I lead our team here at Prolific. For those that are not familiar with Prolific, we help the RevOps space by focusing on key accounts through relationship mapping and strategic account management through account planning. And we're a Salesforce partner, so we're 100% native to the platform. But Prolific aside, we hope that you guys can get a lot of great data points, a lot of takeaways from the experts that we have on the call. And what we're going to cover today is, number one, really the foundation for selling organizations to go to market, and almost more importantly, just the key metrics that are typically leveraged to set up the go-to-market team for success. And two, we're going to talk about how to guide sellers to the right accounts within their territories, and talk about everyone on the call's approaches to account segmentation and best practices around that. And three is really going to be focused around the execution. So once you and your sellers determine the right accounts to target, what's going to be the approach from there to build the right relationships? How are you going to follow a go-to-market process that works for your company to ultimately drive revenue growth? So I'll be asking the questions. I'll chip in where I can, but I'd love for you guys to hear from the experts, and we'll go through a quick round of introductions. Jeff, then Stephen, then Jack, if you guys could introduce yourselves and your companies, and we'll get started from there.
All right, Eddie, first of all, thanks for having me on. My name is Jeff Ignacio. I lead go-to-market operations, enablement, and growth at Regrow Ag. We're a climate tech-focused company driving climate outcomes through agricultural change. We track Scope 3 emissions for CPGs and agribusiness. I've been in revenue operations for roughly 10 years. Before that, in FP&A. I have a passion for going in as a team of one and growing the team and scaling the company from 10 to 100 million. So happy to join you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jeff.
So Stephen Lowisz here again. Thanks, Eddie, for having us join as well. Appreciate the invite. I'm the CEO of the Revenue Institute. I was previously a sales and marketing leader, then realized I like the tech side of sales and marketing. So I have a team that does analytics, CRM integrations. We're launching a couple of our own cool products around revenue intelligence and lead enrichment, et cetera. But anything on the nerdy tech side of sales and marketing, we probably have a hand in it.
That's why we're here today. Thanks, Stephen.
Awesome. I can close this out. I'm Jack. I lead the selling team here at Prolific. Eddie already introduced who we are, so I'll save everybody the need to explain who Prolific is again. But been with our business since we went to market with our apps on Salesforce, and have supported a number of different roles here at the Prolific organization, from being an individual contributor to now running the sales and CS organization and being responsible for things related to account segmentation. How do we develop strategies to grow customers, retain customers, and basically we're in that RevOps hat as a member of a small business. So excited for the discussion today.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I'm not sure the full audience that's on the call today, but when we were first going to market at Prolific, we engaged with, it felt like a lot of the time, sales operations, which is obviously a crucial part to the business. But my personal experience is I've seen revenue operations come up more and more during our selling process, because they're such an important piece to the puzzle, which is why I'm looking forward to today's conversation. So let's start with just building the foundation of a successful go-to-market program. Now, that could be at the start of the year, could be at the start of a company, it could be a mid-year health check. But I'd like to just hear from the three of you the types of data and metrics that you're consistently looking at, that you're consistently analyzing to really stay nimble and ensure that your go-to-market team is going to be successful throughout the year. That could be things like demographics. It could be industries, company size. It could be propensity to buy. Let's just start, and I'd love the team's perspective on how you get started in building that foundation. And Jeff, I'd like to start with you. You mentioned it in your introduction. You've built RevOps teams. You've built out go-to-market processes. I'd love your perspective on just starting to build that foundation and key things that you look for and that you execute against.
Yeah, so I think it's a perfect time of the year. August, for some of the largest businesses, they've already started their planning. For startups, for the mid-market firms, you're probably starting to talk about planning, but probably won't get started in earnest until September or October. And this is a function of, not having enough, operational staff to help really build that plan. What I really look for is a couple of things. At the beginning of the year, do we have our ICP, our personas, and our TAM and our SAM and our SOM dialed in? That really gives me an idea of where the targets should be for where we point our go-to-market organization. The second is to then right size the organization itself. So our marketing capacity, and that comes in the form of headcount in the right roles. So you might have demand gen, performance marketing, content, PR, events. No matter what your play is, you want to have the right folks on the team. And then you want to be able to support that with the programmatic spend. So you have an idea of what the expenses are going to look like from the marketing side of the house. And that's going to serve as your budget for, where to generate those returns in the form of pipeline. Second is going to be the sales capacity, really making sure that we've dialed in the right roles and responsibilities. So if you have a team selling motion, what are those different roles? How many of those roles you should have? So ratios to the book of business you want to generate, ratios to each other. So there's some famous ratios out there for how many SDRs you should have, for AEs, how many solution engineers you have for your sales reps. And then the third thing is really overlaying that and fitting that within your revenue operating model. You can normally come to that with a bottoms up or a top down. A lot of businesses operate with just the top down. It's great to balance that with a bottoms up motion. So the earlier you plan, the more opportunity you have to create dialogue across your partners from both those ends. And then fourth is really when you have that revenue operating model, hopefully it describes your end-to-end life cycle and those conversion rates all across the funnel from lead to opportunity, opportunity to close. They really match the benchmarks you're trying to set, and that they're feasible within what the coverage ratios you need in order to generate the business you'd like for the year. So, really thinking about this time as a perfect opportunity to plan. And then throughout the year, we're trying to execute through operating cadences to understand how much pipeline we're generating, how we're forecasting against that pipeline, and then what are some of the areas where we can coach throughout the year to identify some of the problem areas where we can correct them in flight and get ourselves back on a good flight path.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, your last point there, throughout it's about staying nimble, right? And consistently analyzing that data. What are the success? What are the big wins that we've had recently? That's great. Thanks, Jeff. Stephen, you've you recently started a business, and so you had to start from scratch, right? I'd love to hear your perspective on just how you got started.
So it evolved. I mean, I'll give you almost 10 years in 30 seconds. I started out as a sales guy first, grunt, outbound sales, focused on the Fortune 500, landed 20 of them. I'm bad at most things in life, but by 21, I penetrated 20 of them in a really stupid way. It was all cold outbound outreach, just being a professional pest, as I would call it. Eventually left the org that I was with for about 5 years, ran a sales and marketing team at a VC-backed startup. And then I did sales consulting for a while, realized I like tech more so, and answering more of the difficult questions. So in my mind, and I'll segue this back in here in just a second, but in my mind, RevOps isn't just about maximizing revenue, it's about customer acquisition cost. Almost anybody can spend more to earn more, but it comes down to what's your tolerable acquisition cost, and that determines your go-to-market strategy. So if I'm a VC-backed startup, like I used to be, I'm going to be focused on revenue and number of customers because I'm going for my next round of funding. I now run a professional services firm, and we're transitioning into a tech product as well, or 2 tech products. I care more about customer acquisition costs. So then that defines, am I going after whales or am I going after mid-market companies? Now, in a more generic answer, I would say don't just go top-down approach. It doesn't work. You need to go after the middle segment as well, the mid-level manager, director level, that's going to be able to be the champion, which I know is what Prolific is all about, or at least to a certain extent. And then it's figuring out where can you hit them and how often can you hit them. So I'm a big fan of cold outreach still, but if you're doing outreach siloed away from inbound, well, it's going to be relatively fruitless. And same thing if you're doing inbound but no outbound, you're not going to be landing those big accounts that you're trying to target. So it's trying to get 5-10 people in each org, looking at a list of top 100 companies, whether it's because you believe that they can fit within your CAC because they're mid-market, maybe they're in market with intent data, or you're just saying, screw it, let's go for the top Fortune 100. But those questions need to be answered first. And it's how much can you spend to acquire a customer? Because whoever spends more to a certain extent is going to win.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I'm sure Jack agrees with this, and I'll get over to Jack, but that really resonated with me because we experienced that at Prolific. It was, we approached it similar. When we were coming to market, we needed to validate that our products suited the market. So naturally you go to the higher SMB, to the mid-market space, to say, do we have a product here that's going to resonate? And then you have to be very selective, especially as a smaller business, where you're going to throw your time and resources, back to your CAC point. And are we going to throw the dollars, and are we going to throw the bodies, which are precious resources, at a small company? So towards those whales, those enterprise accounts, right? So it's that really resonated with me, and thanks for sharing. I'd love to hear, Jack, your perspective on. Well, I'll back up. I've asked Jack to kind of wear a RevOps hat while he's also the sales leader, which I'm sure is common across a lot of organizations. I don't agree with our philosophy and what we're doing, but it's kind of the fact of the matter of being a small business and having to wear a lot of hats. So Jack, kind of your role as a hybrid sales leader plus revenue operations, and where you're going to focus your time and your team's time. I'd love your perspective on the day-to-day and metrics you're looking at to know where to spend yours and our IC's time.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's something where for me, the things that I focus on are, all right, what are the segments where we're seeing a lot of traction? And then within each of those segments, how are the buyers or the roles varying? And it's not something where you can say, oh, the first year of business, Eddie, I think about who we sold to, it's completely changed to now. That's how we started this webinar, right? We said, A lot of times it was sales ops when we first went to market. Now RevOps has become very much the place where they're the primary decision maker and a lot of time budget holder with regards to initial deals and renewals. And I think the reason behind that is because RevOps is more all-encompassing across all go-to-market functions. And it's not just related to sales, it's related to CS. And this world that we live in now, it's the lines between those two are becoming grayer and grayer. And I think that's a good thing in a lot of ways. And so for us, it was one, identifying who are we selling to? How does that vary as we start to look at large companies to small companies? But at the beginning, and this gets to what Stephen was alluding to of, starting from scratch, the value props a lot of times are the same things. Like when we sell to a small business customer, they're not coming to us with completely different problems than a Fortune 50 customer that we support. The scale of those problems are different, but the use cases and the way in which our solution delivers value a lot of times are the same. So it's knowing, okay, as you start to get up segment, how do we take that use case, that value prop, that point of view that we've created, and how do we start to get that into the hands or ears of a buying group that's going to go from one person at a 25-person company to 15 people at a 1,000 or 2,000 person company. And so I think the best things that you can do, learning from some of the hurdles that Eddie and I both went through doing this at Prolific, it's get your systems, your CRM into a place up front where you can begin to track this information easily from the get-go. What are the buying personas or roles? What are the value props or use cases? And then what's the upside that's being tracked up front? Because that's a huge piece about how I think about allocating internal resources to our team. We have customers of ours that are Fortune 100, Fortune 50 that have very small footprints of Prolific and don't plan to expand that footprint really ever. And you need to be aware that this concept of a strategic customer could be something where you have a 250 person company where you have a small footprint, but there's 200 seats of upside, right? And I want to make sure that I'm allocating the right resources to that account relative to one that a lot of times, I think historically, it's just based on employee size. So that was the big pivot for me that I basically put into play, was kind of eliminating the blinders of only looking at how we segment accounts based on employee count or revenue, and starting to look at specific to what we sell and what we deliver to that company. How much broader value can we deliver? How much value are they getting out of our tool today? And let's provide resources accordingly and have that be a variable in the equation as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jack. And yeah, you mentioned a couple things around there around CRM technologies, obviously. And what I love about the RevOps space is, actually, Stephen, you said it, so I'm not taking credit for this, and nor do I want this. But the RevOps space, why I love it is you're also tech nerds, right? You have to understand the technology. You have to know what's coming up with new technologies in the space, because that's what you're going to, one, that's how you're going to analyze your metrics, and two, that's what you're handing off to your go-to-market team, which is, I'll say it, I'm a salesperson, salespeople that sometimes they adopt technology and sometimes they don't, right? And unfortunately, it's going to fall on your shoulders to, one, hold the budget and to purchase the correct technology that salespeople are going to use and get value out of. So along the theme of foundation, Jeff, I think you have a strong perspective. I know you have a very strong pulse on the market when it comes to new technologies in the space, and obviously the AI buzz that's going around. I'd love to hear your perspective on how you've built a strong tech foundation and also how you drive adoption to that tech with your go-to-market team.
I think when we think about technology as a key piece of the go-to-market organization, up to a certain point, it sits within revenue operations. And then once a business gets up to a certain scale, what you'll find is that the direct systems administration configuration moves into a consolidated central business systems team. the revenue operations team, or whatever they would call it at their organization, likely focuses on the operating cadences, the KPIs, process improvement. But no matter the setup, technology is one of the bedrocks of making sure that your processes are as automated as possible. And so when you're thinking about the technologies, it's best to make sure that you identify which parts of your processes should be managed by technology, and how do you streamline the time it takes to input the information you need within your core systems. Can that information be accessed, shared, and seen by others? And then if there's opportunities to automate it, that would be fantastic. So I think right now you're seeing an interesting moment in tech, merged with the macroeconomic environment. You're seeing a lot of consolidation. There seems to be 4 to 6 super apps these days. These super apps range a wide variety of features and capabilities, and that's fantastic for the end consumer or the B2B buyer. And for me, I'm looking at these technologies as an opportunity to see, which column should we sit in, because there's a lot of these feature-rich, capability-rich vendors out there. And I want to make sure that I'm setting myself up for success, given the constraints that we have around budget and around administrative capability across my team. So it's a careful balance of providing maximal process and benefit value within the org, while also not trying to go ahead and kill the operations team by adding 20 tools to go configure.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I feel like in years past, it's been, let's try to solve all problems with technology, to where all problems can't be solved with technology, right? And the market's kind of course correcting right now, as it should. So consolidating that tech stack and making sure you're understanding your internal problems and solving that with technology is absolutely crucial. Stephen, do you have any perspective on technologies you used or would recommend?
So you have 2 options. One is go the route of simplicity. The other is use best in class, right? So use HubSpot versus Salesforce. HubSpot is, we're going to give you everything that you need, and then you can slightly customize it, but it's fairly limiting. And in my opinion, and many will disagree, it's an 80% baked product in almost any area that they're in, but it's the simplest tool. I myself, because I am more of a tech nerd, like best in class tools, but I like automation, integration, and validation. So those are the 3 core tenets that I really focus on, whether it's me or any of my clients. If it can be automated, it should. Integrations are highly undervalued, even though it seems like common sense. Yes, every CRM probably integrates with your marketing automation system, but are you also integrating with your accounting? Are you also integrating with your project management? If you're a SaaS company, your product analytics, etc., I'm going to treat, in my case, Salesforce as my source of truth for everything. So the back end may be really complicated, but as long as my team has a simplified user experience, I don't really care how complex the back end is. So that's my thought on it. And then validation, I think, is highly underrated too. So I'm a sales guy through and through, far more than I am a tech nerd. I'll put it this way. I took 1 Java class in college and paid a freelance dev to do it. It was too much for me. So I'm technical for a sales and marketing guy, but there's a limit there. But validation is highly underrated. And as a sales rep, I want to do as little data entry as possible. I don't want to go create visual org maps or champion charts on, who's a champion, who's a contributor, etc. But when you validate and you force your team to do the minimal amount, because everything else is integrated or automated, that's how you start to get a really good system. So it depends on your flavor. I'd rather go spend the money and do best in class, or you can go the simple route. But I will say, focus on what the end user's experience is, not your experience just doing admin and trying to set it up. Because a good system, once it's set up, should run smoothly, fairly on its own.
Yeah, no, I love it. Thank you for your perspective. And Jack, I don't know if you have any opinion. I know Jeff and Stephen pretty much handled the tech and the approach, but any perspective on the technology landscape?
I would just say that from experience evaluating tools, using tools, and then obviously selling to organizations and trying to deliver value to our customer base, the big thing that I think just on the technology front that is a lot of times overlooked is, we talked about, oh, there's this whole era of, well, there's a tool for that, there's a tool for that, there's a tool for that, there's a tool for everything out there. And you can go and find, whatever you need, and there's gonna be someone that wants to sell it to you, and you can buy that, but if you don't give a why behind it and aren't very prescriptive of when to use it, I think that's the big thing. Then you're ultimately dependent on users connecting a lot of dots themselves, salespeople connecting a lot of dots themselves, which likely they won't do. And it's not because they aren't able to, it's because, salespeople, we talk about it all the time. If you're not given a reason behind it, you're not given the why, a lot of times they're going to stay with their status quo, the ways that they like to operate within. And I think, for our experience selling a solution that is account planning, you look at all the surveys or, case studies, it delivers value when done right. Now, the issue is people say, hey, here's an account planning tool, go build account plans for all your customers. And that in theory is great, but in practice is not, because it's not sustainable. So what I've realized is to make your sellers successful, to make your customers successful, you need to be very prescriptive, understand what are the criteria for when this tool is used. And if you're able to create a formula where you're saying, all right, this logically fits into our model and we're going to use it enough, then a tool makes a lot of sense. But there are times where you're looking around, you're saying, all right, this is something that we're using 1 to 5% of the time. Those are the tools right now that are ultimately the ones that are getting cut from next year's budget, right? So the more that you can come in and be prescriptive to your team about when you have deals of this size and you have accounts of this value, whatever sort of criteria. I'm talking about what we sell and where we operate, which is planning, but it correlates to other solutions as well. The more you do that, the more you're going to get value out of your investment, because regardless of how much automation you build in, tools will still require end user interaction and input, at least for the time being. And you need to be as prescriptive as possible from an operations and enablement perspective to get the value that you want to get out of a tool from your user base.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think a good segue into we'll call it the execution portions of today's webinar. We've talked about building the foundations, metrics the crew looks at, technology that's potentially leveraged and how to look at that tech stack. But then it comes to there's a point to where you hand off a territory, and I don't want to get into a long territory planning discussion, but you're handing a rep a territory, and that territory includes accounts, and those accounts include people that you need to build relationships in order to either win that logo or keep that customer, grow that customer, etc. And the foundation behind that is account segmentation, right? And how you guide your sellers into the correct accounts, because every account's not an A account. You have your A, B, C's, and D's. Jeff, what are some of the things that you do to hand a territory to a rep that includes accounts? Those accounts may be current customers, they may be prospects, to say, here are the accounts you should be focusing on. What are some of the metrics that you leverage, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, so when it comes to a territory, one, we have to segment the business and then identify, what are the ratios that we want accounts to a specific sales rep, and then what is our go-to-market coverage playbook going to look like? So at the very pinnacle of the pyramid, there's a 1-to-1 strong likelihood that we're going to go 1-to-1 outbound plus an account-based marketing set of tactics to go after the market or those accounts. Generally, what you'll find is a capacity of 10 accounts per quarter. Just if you do the math, how many selling hours you have per quarter, how much of that is dedicated to working your accounts, you can really only feasibly do 10. So when you get to that QBR, sales reps presenting their territory plan, you only have probably opportunity to speak about 2 of your account plans. And realistically, you're building 3 per month, so 9 total. And you want to try to get to a point where these account plans are built with speed, with haste, but they still present a good depth of information. The second thing is once you get to that middle layer of your accounts, your Bs, you're in the world of one to many, right? So if you're going to be opportunistic with those leads that come in on an inbound basis, but you're also going to have hopefully some more air coverage in addition to ABM. You're going to look at your performance marketing, these different demand generation tactics. You may even bring a few of them, a handful of them to events, or try to invite them out if you see they're attending as well. And so that second layer of accounts is where you're going to put a lot of your effort. Your A accounts and your B accounts. Your A accounts are going to get more kind of tailored, detailed research and information. Then you get to your third list, your C accounts. These are going to be the ones where you're extremely opportunistic. They're not quite strong fits, but if they come inbound, they'll come inbound. So when we're handing out a territory and accounts to the reps, we want to be prescriptive across revenue operations and enablement. We want them to know, here are the different plays that we think. This is the data that we're presenting and why they're A or B accounts. Now you may revise, the grading that we give you because we're grading at scale and you have more boots on the ground than we do to see the accounts. And you might say this B account is actually an A account, provide an exclusion reason, and then we'll go ahead and escalate it up to an A for the very reasons that you might cite. And with that, it also gives the rep fuel to the fire when they're speaking with their management. They can give them an overview that they've studied their book of business. They've already been given some pre-work by revenue operations, but now these account plans are showing that they're walking through the door and actually, looking at these accounts, reading the 10Ks, reading the public releases, getting a sense for who these accounts are. It's almost as a private investigator, do you know your accounts like the back of your hand? So the metrics I'm looking for are 1, account plan completion, and then I'm looking for account plan quality, and that honestly could be done by AI in the future, but for now, I think a lot of reps have their managers, enablement, and RevOps review these account plans one-on-one. You do so in either an ad hoc fashion, or you do it at the QBR, right? You get in an opportunity where you're at an offsite and you're locked in the room together as a team and you're going through your plans. And at the end, you call your forecast number and you do a roll up, and that's your honest to God forecast for next quarter without actually knowing what's coming in. And so the metrics that I would be looking for: completion again, kind of the check off with the sales team. And then 3, we progress and see how much pipeline we are generating throughout the quarter against these A and B accounts. And it gives me a sense for looking at account penetration metrics. Are we getting those first appointments? Who are we getting those first appointments with? Are we going after the right levels of power? So, with SDRs and AEs, you can look at how many calls or meetings with personas, but you also want to look at how many of those calls and meetings are with people with a position of power or authority. And so a metric, instead of calls, it's dial to power. It's something that I'd be looking at. So some metrics that I would be looking for up front and then throughout the quarter, just to see that we're breaking in and getting those initial touch points.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You really brought that all together. One, starting with the scientific approach with metrics behind it. Here's how much time, hours you should be spending on an A, B, C account. But then bringing in the different variables and the different business groups together. This, in your A's and B's, account-based marketing and marketing team should be involved. We should leverage the resources, time, money, etc., tied to those resources into these accounts, because this is what revenue operations has analyzed and said should be your key accounts. But then ultimately you're handing over basically the playbook, but you also realize that at some point in time that can change based off of rep execution, right? There's going to be foundational conversations that are going to happen in each and every account, and a C account could turn to an A account where you're bringing in those resources. But ultimately that account plan needs to be complete. There needs to be thought. There needs to be a plan in the why behind why this should be an A account, if the rep's going to spend that time and resource and company resources to bring them on as a customer or grow that customer. So Jack, I know we deal with that every single day, and I think you'll probably have a strong perspective around segmentation as well.
Yeah, I think, the one thing I'll add into what Jeff shared, just in terms of once you segmented your accounts, once you've built your plans and you start to think about, all right, well, how do I swap in an A or a C or a B account? The plans require execution, right? So, you present your plans at a QBR or ad hoc, but the most important piece is that the selling team actually takes those plans and they put them into action, right? Because what that gives revenue operations is, if you do it in the right manner, in the right place, a data set to work off of. Okay, in this vertical, in companies of this segment, how often are we seeing this type of messaging work? How often are we seeing this type of messaging with this type of stakeholder work? And then how do we take the successful strategies and plans and create templates or playbooks that can be used and disseminated across other sellers in like customer bases? I actually had a question though, for Jeff, just based on how he goes about the segmentation process and tiering process. Because it sounds like, for your team, you guys are assigning A, B, and C to the accounts for the sellers. And then they almost need to go back and say, no, this is a B account or an A account for this reason. What's your process once that's deployed? What's your process for allowing sellers to change a C account to an A account? And then, or to turn an A account to a C account? Do you kind of have them go through a formal request process? Or I'm just curious what your experience is with that.
Yeah, so I think any good process requires some sort of intake form. And that intake form is in the form of either Salesforce cases or Jira tickets. I personally use Asana at my org. And it's a simple form that comes in. When those requests come in, I give instructions at the planning time. Here's how you handle these certain processes. So for example, how do you disqualify an account? Disqualify account would mean, you fill out a reason, you reason code it, and you provide an open text, and then we'll review it. And once it's validated, it moves across. Same thing, same process for the elevator process, going up or down. We'll do the same thing. If I see an inordinate amount of requests from a team, it suggests to me that my scoring is wrong. And probably go back to the well. So you want to buffer in a long lead time so that you have that feedback window. And obviously you want to make sure that you give a little bit of margin of error, because believe it or not, reps will probably go to the last day, the last hour, and you haven't left yourself a lot of space to make those adjustments. So just plan ahead that you can put a stick or a carrot on the reps, but quite frankly, there's going to be a few laggers in their submissions. So that's the process I use. If I see like that, again, a spike in requests, it means my scoring is wrong. And quite frankly, a lot of scoring today, or maybe in years past, was just using these data providers and just using what we call firmographic information. And we've graduated towards adding intent-based information. Firmographics would be revenue, employee size, headquarters, pretty basic. You don't really know what's happening with that customer until you have that first meeting. You talk to them, you get more information, more facts on the ground. So for example, with Prolific, account plans may or may not be part of the selling motion for a VSB or SMB seller. Ticket price of $1,000 or less per year, probably not good use of time. But with enterprise seller with seven-figure tickets or six-figure tickets, and this org company you're selling to, not everyone is an enterprise sales rep, right? So what does that look like? You won't know that until you actually talk to a sales manager. So there's some things that I look for afterwards, right? Like the reps will tell me, yeah, the slices you've given me, they're good, but here's the reason. I've actually talked to this account 3 years ago. They don't have this going on and this going on and this going on internally. That leads me to believe they're an A account. Well, that information they shared with me, I probably can't find that in my data provider.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
No, I'm just curious. And then, so when you start to get that feedback from reps, is that something where you'll start to build into your model that type of criteria? Hey, I spoke to this account 3 years ago, just going off your example. I never thought about this variable that the seller brought up. This is something that we need to start tracking and applying to account segmentation, in next year.
If you give yourself enough of a lead time, you could actually bake it for this year, right? Especially if your segmentation team is nimble enough to incorporate that data point in. Give you a real life example. My company, we cover quite a bit of crops in the USA and other regions of the world, and we look for different farming practices using remote satellite imagery. Now, there are pockets of crops and interventions that we just don't manage or handle. But when you look at a company, all I'm getting from my data provider is revenue, and I'm getting where they're located and what industry they're in. But when I go to the grocery store, I can see what brands they're selling, and I can look at the ingredients that are in those products. It quickly tells me they're in or out. Just quickly qualifying them are in or out. So what we've done is we've gone out and built ChatGPT or a large language model that goes out and cites the source of what products they source. It won't tell me how much of what crop they're buying, but that's just another extension of being creative to add new tools to our data set that allow us to inform whether that company should be qualified in or qualified out. So there's a whole lot of change happening in the sales space, which I find extremely riveting and exhilarating. And I think these account plans need to account for that. So, give yourself enough buffer time with your planning cycle so that you can allow yourself to flex in those nimble changes. If not, it'll have to wait until the following year. But that's a lot of heartache for the org.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds like a fantastic process that you've implemented, Jeff. It's not an easy process to implement due to the fact that not every seller is going to be the same. But what I love about that process is for your A and maybe B sellers, it's consistently challenging them to think about their accounts in the correct way and challenge the metrics that are put upon them once they're handed their territory or their accounts and that account segmentation. So I think that's just a very strong proof point why revenue operations and the processes are so important to challenge reps thinking, because you know best how you go to market, because you know the wins and you know why your biggest customers are the biggest customers, right? And you're also able to get challenged on a day-to-day basis as to why their thinking is different than your thinking and the metrics behind it. So that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
I'm just going back to what Stephen said at the beginning. I think about, Stephen, you alluded to customer acquisition costs, right? And when I think about what we're hearing from Jeff, it's not as much about the cost to acquire a customer, but the cost to unqualify a customer, which is increasing your time to acquire another customer, right? So if you can start to serve up in a scalable way guidance to sellers of these accounts are not worth going after, that ultimately is allowing them to focus on the ones in a smaller barrel to shoot at. And then it comes down to execution. I'm thinking about my time, Eddie, when I first started at inside sales at Prolific, and I'm, running a report and it's just show me all high tech companies, 250 to 2,500 employees, and I'm just calling into them. Comparative to now, where we've got tools that'll say, these are the companies that are on your website. And, some of that's tooling, but some of that's also as you go through the process of understanding your fit, taking feedback from your sellers and making sure that you're using that feedback to, avoid that at scale across your selling organization. So,
yeah, no, it's sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to take a little bit different approach to segmentation. First, I think the metrics that have already been named are going to be the same ones almost anyone's going to target. I will say in a QBR, I challenge reps to be able to articulate what worked, what didn't, why, what do you need help with, etc. So there's a qualitative on top of the quantitative. But when it comes to segmentation, I think a lot of it depends on the maturity of your account exec or BDR, whoever that is. For example, when I was running the VC-backed startup, I had a very small budget because it was a seed-funded company, and we ended up getting a Series A. That was pretty hefty, but it started out as a seed-funded startup, and they had no customers when I joined that weren't from their direct network. And it's a good thing that they were a couple of hotshot execs that made or founded the company. So it worked out okay for them to start. But I had to hire really junior people, and that's the case for a lot of SMBs, and then try to build them from scratch. The good news is they were junior, so I could mold them how I want. The bad news is they were junior, as I think we all know. But my approach wasn't, okay, you target the South, you target the West, etc., or you target this industry or that industry. what I found, and even taking off a RevOps hat for a second and just talking straight sales, people care more now about resonation than they do personalization. So I may be able to read your 10K or talk about your new job or whatever. And I'm not saying that there's no value to those by any means. But if I can resonate with you as a CFO or a CIO or whatever and speak your language better than the next guy, I'm going to resonate with you more so and have a better sales process. So what I would do is actually have 2 or 3 people target the same exact account, targeting different functions so that they had to learn that function and could talk that talk. So we targeted CIOs and COOs primarily, and it worked exceptionally well, getting them to focus on that language. And that language, we focus primarily on financial services, but asset management is very different than banking versus credit unions versus, insurance, right? But operationally, you are going to be able to have that same high-level conversation to qualify that rep and resonate with them at the same time, better than if you just say, hey, Stephen, go target this account over here.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and a different perspective. And I like how you shared one, right now you're starting a business, or you've started a business. That's a very different level than a VC backed company in their series A, B, or C, right? And Jeff, you shared how that process can get more and more mature as you get larger, as you gain resources, et cetera. And so there's no wrong answer from a RevOps perspective to the equation. It's just a matter of what stage you're at and understanding, one, having some self-awareness as to who we are, how many resources do we have, and is it going to be brute force? Are we going to invest technology? Are we going to invest ABM resources? And you just need to understand what part of the maturity you are where you're at as a business. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I know the final piece we were planning on focusing around, like the who, the stakeholders, but I kind of want to take a pivot and think about, okay, we've handed our salespeople the platter. We've talked about ABC accounts that may or may not change throughout the year. But once a rep's involved in an opportunity, a meaningful opportunity for the business, and I'm genuinely curious about this, where does RevOps start and where does RevOps stop, right? How engaged is RevOps in the life cycle of that opportunity and getting a deal closed? Is it consistently? Are you taking a step back once there's a stage 2 or 3 or 4 opportunity in the pipeline, or is there still value to be brought to all of the salespeople? Jeff, I'd love your perspective on once an opportunity is created and maturing, and where your involvement is.
So I think when you think about revenue operations, there's a component where you're involved in the indirect pieces, and then you're involved in the direct pieces. So let me just break those down a little bit. On the indirect side, you're doing the forecasts, you're running pipeline management calls. You might be running them or just providing the data into the sales calls. That's for the sales operations component of revenue operations. And directly, now different orgs set this up differently. So, for example, there's the pricing matrices. Are you authorized to go above a certain discount or not? Are there terms that need to be discussed? Sometimes that goes into what's called a deal room. Revenue operations might run that deal room. The deal room itself can be cross-collaborative and cross-functional, because you oftentimes have big dollar prospects, whales in your pipeline that could materially make your number. But guess what? Your product has a number of workarounds that they'd like you to shrink those workarounds. And so you're going to have to bring in the product team, and that brings in a lot of friction with your roadmap potentially. So revenue operations wrangles a lot of the different partners within the organization. And so in that regard, you're still directly involved in the sale. Next up is if you don't have legal operations to work on your contracts, well, guess what? Guess who's involved with the master subscription agreement? Your revenue operations team. They're going to look through, especially if you're operating on the prospect's paper as opposed to your own paper. You definitely want to bring those extra set of eyes in, depending if you don't have that function in-house. So revenue operations, in my mind, for the most part, is working on the upfront and the back end and behind the scenes. But every once in a while, you're still very, very much involved with the direct selling. And for those who don't have proposal automation software, and you do need some extra help, you either layer on enablement or product marketing to support there, or deal desk. But if you're bootstrap, guess what? Guess who's getting the call? It's probably revenue operations.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, any perspective on that?
Yeah, so RevOps is going to be involved throughout the entire process from beginning to after the end, because it does encompass customer success and overall customer experience.
Yeah.
But in terms of hands-on work within an opportunity, I think it's going to be more from a back office perspective with CPQ, which is something that historically has been enterprise focused, meaning you are an enterprise company, whereas now SMBs are using it nonstop to quote and get through the door with enterprise accounts. I think making sure that sales and marketing are working together is often, both teams are wrangled together by RevOps, and it becomes broader than just revenue alone. It becomes tech behind sales and marketing. So are we nurturing the hell out of everybody that we are currently in negotiations with? Is marketing on top of retargeting them? Is sales consistently following up with them, et cetera? So I don't want a RevOps team to become sales operations or marketing ops and get into the nitty gritty of basic reporting and whatnot that can be done by, an entry level worker, but they are the ones that essentially quarterback from behind the scenes, not client facing, but they are the ones bringing it all together throughout the entire cycle.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Stephen. And so I think I'll end with this one. I've learned a lot from you guys today, so thank you for your perspectives on revenue operations during different points of the life cycle of a customer. But Stephen, you consult on this. Jeff, you've lived this life and are running a strong RevOps team for your company. Jack, you have a unique perspective as a sales leader. I'd like to just leave it off. If you do or if you don't, that's fine. Just one or two best practices, final thoughts, recommendations, anything that you'd like to add to wrap today up, and I'll open up the floor for whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump in here. I think the best thing that I can recommend anybody is ask better questions. A mentor a long time ago gave me the phrase that the quality of your life is going to be dependent on the quality of your questions. And I think that's where RevOps really comes into play. And that's why I got into more of the tech side of things. Why do we care about things like multi-touch attribution or account planning or customer acquisition costs? Again, it's not just spend more to earn more. That doesn't work unless you are very well funded. But in the end, are you asking the right questions? Are you asking better questions? And that goes hand in hand with when you're going through discovery on large accounts too. Are you asking BANT questions to see if they're qualified superficially? Or are you asking questions that are actually going to resonate, make you sound intelligent just by asking them, not even answering hard questions, and go from there? So ask better questions.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say now's a perfect time to re-examine where you are through the year, Q1 through, projected where you're going to end in Q3, and then take a look at your pipeline for Q4. Obviously, that's going to give you some semblance of insight of whether you're going to make the year or not. If you have less than a 90-day cycle or less than a 120-day cycle, there's an opportunity for all your pipeline to be generated from now until the end of September to make it for the year. And then, for the organizations who are, quote unquote, doing more with less these days, I think it's an opportunity to think through, plan early, right? Even if you don't have cooperation across the org, do a bottoms up, right? Do a bottoms up within your org, do a postmortem. What are we learning from this year? Did we get the roles and responsibilities right? Did we get the mix right? Did we get the ICP and the accounts we're going after? Were there any regrettable losses in our pipeline, and what can we do to fix them for next year? And I know that's a little bit sales centric, but I think it's an opportunity for each department to do a bottoms up, so that by the time you have a top down planning for next year, you have an informed opinion, and you can go to battle with your brothers and sisters in the org to build a thoughtful plan for next year.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think your losses are just as important as your wins, right? And a lot of times it's only focused on why did we win this customer compared to why did we lose this customer. So post-mortem is absolutely crucial. So thanks for sharing. Jack, any final thoughts from you?
Just say it's never there's all sorts of, like we talked about, all sorts of tools that you can invest in, but you can also use the ones you have today, just putting the foundational pieces of understanding. All right, why did they purchase with us? Who was involved? What's the upside in an account? Those are things when I think about, if I could go back 5.5 years, I didn't put those and be tracking them right from the get-go. So never think that you always have to you're a step away from starting this process. There's very, very basic steps that you can take to give yourself a data set that you'll benefit from years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you guys. I've learned a lot today. For those that are going to be listening to this recording that are on the call, I know Steve and Jeff, you guys already have amazing followings on LinkedIn, but I guess just where to find you guys if there are questions, anything like that. Feel free to put a quick commercial in and we'll wrap things up here.
I'll go first. LinkedIn, Jeff Ignacio. You can also find me at RevOpsImpact.com. I teach a RevOps course at the RevOps Co-op. Then I publish a weekly newsletter called the RevOps Impact Newsletter at revengine.substack.com.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
For me, LinkedIn as well. I eat, sleep, and breathe it. And then on top of that, revenueinstitute.com if you want to see some of the products we're building and some of what we have going on, particularly with Salesforce, which I think all of us are fans of.
Awesome. And for those that are on the call curious about account planning, that's what we do for Salesforce customers. So just appreciate everybody listening to this recording. Those that were able to join today, thank you very much. Thought it was great content. Hopefully there were some key takeaways for everybody that gets to engage with this content. So thank you guys. Awesome conversation, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.